There are times in our history where stories that are today dismissed as fantasy, phantasms, and myth were believed as readily as gospel from the pulpit. In Victorian Britain, these stories were often strange, disturbing, and horrifying. What you are about to hear is a story that captured the minds and haunted the dreams of a nation. Welcome to Victorian Folklore. In the first half of the 19th century, the sewers below London were an inefficient labyrinth of tunnels that twisted and turned beneath the vast metropolis above. The city had grown too large too quickly, thanks to the rapid industrialization of Britain over the preceding century. The streets ran with the cumulative filth of one of the largest cities in the world. The Thames was little more than an overgrown gutter, choked of any life by the waste that ran into its waters. Disease ran rampant through London, the most feared of which was of course cholera, a devastating illness thought to be caused by foul-smelling miasma, rather than the bacteria that we now know to be the cause of the deadly disease. It is within this city of pestilence and death, dear listener, that our story begins. A farmer had brought his prized sow into the city to sell. Times were hard, and he wished to earn some quick money by selling the animal, a corpulent black beast fattened on a life of easy countryside living. As she was being brought into the cholera-ridden city, something must have alerted the animal to the fact that she would soon be delivered to a waiting butcher and his rusted knives, and so she escaped. Running wild through the city, desperate to escape her pursuers, for she had more than her own life to protect. Unbeknownst to the farmer, the sow was pregnant, and those implacable maternal instincts caused her to flee from her impending doom. The sow ran squealing to the one place the humans chasing her would not follow, into the filth-covered foulness of London's sewers. There, sheltered from the humans above, and fattened on the refuse of the city that made its way to her, she waited, and eventually gave birth to her litter, who were fed on waste, scraps, and the teeming hordes of rats that were the original denizens of the sewers. The litter grew blind and feral in those dark depths. Their squeals echoed throughout the labyrinth. As the pigs grew, the sow eventually could not control their hunger, and in a feral rage her screaming progeny turned on her and devoured her alive. Her screams could be heard throughout the city as her ravenous offspring tore her to pieces. From there, the litter began to breed with one another, each generation becoming more and more monstrous than the last. They grew vicious, turning on one another in the dark. Only the strongest or most cunning of each new litter survived more than a few days without being devoured. On and on, this cycle of inbreeding and cannibalism continued, with the swine horde growing ever larger with each passing month. It was during this time that the pigs first tasted the flesh of man. With the disease and violence that ravaged London at the time, it should come as no surprise that eventually a corpse would find its way into those foul depths, and into the hungry mouths and growling stomachs of the black swine. They had never tasted meat like it, so used to offal, scraps, rats, and each other as they were. The swine horde found a new hunger awakened in them, and their terrible screams could be heard throughout the city, especially in the borough of Hampstead, which was built directly above their nest. There was but one thing keeping the horde of black swine at bay during those years: the Fleet Ditch. The underground river was the last obstacle in the path of the black sewer swine in their quest for the surface world, and its current was so strong that whenever the stubborn beasts tried to cross it, they were pushed back to their vile nest. Despite this, there was still widespread fear that someday the horde of sewer swine would be large and strong enough to push through the sewers and rampage across the surface, devouring men, women, and children, and drowning first London and then the rest of the country in blood and filth. Luckily for London, and for the rest of Britain, it was around this time that the government and engineers of the country began to work on eliminating the pestilences and diseases that ran rampant throughout the city. Thanks to the decades-long project started by Joseph Bazalgette, London's sewers were modernised to suit the needs of a growing metropolis. No longer did sewage flow through the streets and thoroughfares of the city. Epidemics of cholera became rarer, and the Thames began to recover, though it would take years before life fully returned to its waters and banks. The reconstruction of the sewers also had the effect of further isolating the black swine, preventing them from ever reaching the surface world and feasting upon the flesh of man. And so London moved on, and eventually forgot the screams of feral pigs in the night, as if it were all a mere nightmare. As for what happened to the pigs themselves, I cannot say. Perhaps they devoured each other in desperation, or perhaps they still roam through forgotten labyrinths, searching for a way up to the surface. It has been close to 160 years since they were last seen. Who knows what a century and a half of inbreeding and starvation has done to them. If we are lucky, dear listener, we will never find out.